When the Legends Die, Chapter 46. Woodward arrived in the pickup with two men from the home ranch. They would herd the flock on foot, Woodward said, 5 miles or so down the valley today. The big truck would meet them there and with the horse trailer and mounts for the herders, and the crew would have camp set up. They would go ahead and set up camp each night along the way. The trip would take about 10 days. The boys will start moving them right out, Woodward said. You pack the gear and stow it in my pickup while I help them get started. They'll take the dogs but leave the horse, and you can catch up with the flock. You didn't plan on my going all the way with them? Tom asked. Not if you want to get away. I won't really need you after we get them down out of here. I'd rather not go all the way in. Okay, I'm going on home tomorrow, and you can ride along with me to Piedra or Pagosa or all the way to Antonito, wherever you want to go. That'll be fine. Tom started packing, and Woodward went to help the herders start the flock down the valley. When he came back, Tom had everything stowed. See you in camp this evening, Woodward said as he drove off. Tom mounted old Mac and started to follow, then turned back. He wanted one more look. He rode across the meadow to the place where he could see Granite Peak and Bald Mountain, and he sat in the saddle for some time, just looking. Then he turned and went back past the campsite and down toward the valley. He caught up with the flock about 2 miles below, the sheep strung out and grazing their way. He fell in behind them, said he would keep the drags moving, and the two herders on foot moved up to the flanks of the flock to keep the strays out of the deep timber. They camped that night in a big meadow 6 miles above Piedra town, where the rest of the crew had supper ready and bedrolls waiting. Woodward brought his plate and sat beside Tom to eat. So, you're going back to rodeoing? He asked. Yes. Kind of gets in your blood, I guess, if you're really good. How long you been riding in the big time? Quite a while. Tom didn't want to talk about it. Maybe I'll go into Denver and see you next time around. Tom made no comment. They ate, and Woodward went back for second helping. When he came back, he said, Meant to ask, did you have any bear trouble up there? No trouble. I only saw one bear. It got a lamb. Kill it? I didn't even get a shot. It never came back. Probably the one Manuel was talking about. Big old cinnamon, wasn't it? It could have been, maybe. What do you mean, maybe? Woodward laughed. It was. Had to be. There aren't any grizzlies left. Jim Boone shot the last one 4 years ago, out deer hunting over near Granite Peak. Emptied his 30-30 into it before he put it down. A big devil, old as the hills. Right, Charlie? He asked the supply man. You saw its hide. That grizzly of Jim Boone's? Charlie asked. Big as a horse barn. Scared the hell out of me just looking at the hide. Every now and then, Woodward said, someone still reports a grizzly. Always turns out to be a big cinnamon. See one in the right light, though. He can fool you. Looks downright frosty. You ever see a grizzly? He asked Tom. Years ago. Dish-faced, high on the shoulders, leaves tracks that long. He held his hands a foot apart. Someone spoke of the flavor of the bear meat. The talk turned to wild game in general. Tom paid no attention, was almost unaware of either the talk or the men around him. Everything had changed. He didn't know why. All he knew was that things had changed, and he had no longer a choice. He had things straight as he had planned to have them, but they came out at another place. He knew what he had to do. It was all clear now. Then he heard two of the men arguing over the merits of fat bear meat and fat elk, and he got up and went to his bedroll. The next morning he told Woodward he would go only as far as Piedra town. Woodward nodded. Just as you say. So they rode the few miles into Piedra. Woodward paid him off as they left the bank. Woodward said, Well, Tom Black, good luck. If things don't pan and you ever need a job, look me up. But I'll plan on watching you ride in Denver. They shook hands, and Woodward headed east, toward Pagosa and the road over the divide to Antonito and the home ranch. Tom looked around for the grocery store and the hardware store. Half an hour later, in the hardware store, lashing his pack, he looked out and saw the big Woodward truck, Charlie at the wheel, and the empty horse trailer behind it go down the street on its way to the next campsite. He shouldered his pack, picked up his rifle, and went out and up to the end of the street. There he turned to the hillside and followed the winding goat trails through the brush. He traveled northward almost an hour before he heard the flock in the valley below him. He sat down under a pine and waited, resting his shoulders from the unaccustomed pack, till the last straggling ewe and the last herder had passed. Then he shouldered his pack again, went down the hillside to the trail along the Piedra River, and resumed his journey back to Horse Mountain.